What's going on, YouTube? This is your Melanated Warrior Heavyweight Heinous, and this is another installment of Facts Over Feelings. Leave your feelings at the door so we can get to the facts. And we're going to get right into it. Obviously, you know, we got a lot of content, but, you know, one of the things that I wanted to say before I got into this is that, you know, one of the things that the Panthers were, the big thing that they were exceptional at was heightening the hypocrisy of these Blancos, right? That was their main job. There was a main point of emphasis. And that's what I want you guys to be able to do too as well. So that way it helps you to remain focused, right? You don't, get so wrapped up into thinking or even being distracted by all of the sideshows that they got going on, right? And I know that a lot of these things does make us, it can make you infuriated. It can get you extremely emotional. All of the shootings and all of that different stuff, but we can't pay attention to those things. We just can't. Even when I was taking a look, because a lot of times, the emotion doesn't cause us to think with any clarity, and then, that's going to determine our reaction, right? And even with some of them, like the 13-year-old boy that got shot, nobody's asking why he was out at 2:30 in the morning. It's just ridiculous. Now, I'm not saying that they weren't wrong, but I mean, if you're not there at 2:30 in the morning, then those things aren't likely to happen. Because, see, one thing that you have to understand is that they want to create every excuse as to why is this country is going to fall, because the Matrix is over, and they want to, and it's going to be a new world that we already understand this. But see, the Blancos have bought into it hook, line, and sinker too. Oh, they're destroying the country to be the riots. No, even if we were all getting along, they've already, how many times over the past couple of years or so alone have they convened in Congress and had to raise the debt ceiling? You cannot continue to keep this country going off of a Ponzi scheme. It's just not going to be possible. You see what I'm saying? And then, you even have, I'm not going to say any names because, of course, like I said, people think that I'll be clout chasing. I'm not going to do that. But even, I still hear this individual saying, oh, well, yeah, Biden siding with China and all of this different stuff. No, everybody else, they can talk all that tough talk, just like Trump talked all that tough talk. But like they said, the so-called, Jay-Z said what? He was like, no, but men and women lie, numbers don't. And what's the real numbers? The numbers is what? The numbers is that China owns most of America's debt. So you got to think critically for a second. If you borrow $10,000 for somebody to feed your family, would you go up to that person and talk all sorts of crap to them when you owe them money, and say, for instance, especially if they have power to as well? It wouldn't be the wisest thing to do. That's why you see them catering to them, as well as all the other points that we brought out. China owns most of America's debt. So you got people like, they come over here, they give them business loans. They ain't got no choice. They ain't got no choice but to let these motherfuckers come over here and do what the fuck they want to do. You owe money. Damn, man, catch up. That's why I say stay focused in the game. You're on the court. Don't pay attention to what everybody else is saying in the stands, what they got going on in the stands and shit like that. Stay focused to the end game. Now, I said all of that to say this, like, we're going to go back and, we've already substantiated that there's no such thing as the Blanco scientist, but we really want to put out a key, we're really going to highlight a key example as to why you can't trust anything that come out of their fucking mouth. And we're going to highlight the AIDS epidemic and how they were able to get away with it. And see, this is the thing, like I want to say all the time, is that this is where these Blancos go wrong. They're so caught up into being emotional, they never took a look at us as an example. And we are the greatest example that you can look at, in order to understand exactly that they are the greatest threat. And they, these Blancos in power, or those beings in power, understand that these other Blancos are the greatest threat. Why? Because they believe wholeheartedly in this institution that they set up. You see what I'm saying? So just before, they didn't complain about the police, right? And then they use us as an instrument in order to bring more power, or give more power to the police, to militarize the police. We already know what the police was carrying around in the early 80s. Then with the crack epidemic and all of that different stuff, now you can't distinguish between the police and the SWAT team or a military unit. You see what I'm saying? Dwight D. Eisenhower had already told these Blancos beware of the military-industrial complex. We look at World War I, the sinking of the Lusitania. They entered the war under a false pretext. And the same thing happened in World War II. With the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor, we know that the United States was supplying Japan with oil. And then they restricted that. They said, we're cutting you off. And then they knew the time and the place that Japan was going to bomb. But then they still acted aloof, like they didn't know what was going on. They let their President John F. Kennedy get his fucking brains blown out. And they told him it was some magical bullet in one lone gunman. 9/11. Now think about, like we said, we're about to do two things. We already shown you too with 9/11. We already know about 9/11, but we're also going to kill two birds with one stone. Because when 9/11 happened and thousands of Americans were killed, you didn't see America go over to Iraq and Afghanistan and peacefully protest. No, they came over there and brought the smoke. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Now, see, this is one thing you have. So let's take a look at this. Now, one of the things that you have to understand is that there was, they said, a myth of this. It was a Canadian flight attendant, in the 1970s. He was a gay white man who ended up spreading, and they initially, remember what I said, they initially called it GRID, gay-related infectious disease. So remember, they the ones who called it that and changed it up, because they had to isolate a minority group to make it seem like, because that's what you have to do when you present a new phenomenon to the masses of people in this matrix. Right? And so they said that he's the one came out with it. But now they're going to use some activists in the LGBT community, TQ community, who came out and said, oh, that's a myth and all this different stuff. So I want you to take a look at his language. And of course, we're going to be able to easily debunk him because, like we said, there's no such thing as the Blanco scientist. But notice how easy it is for him to garner credibility within his own community. Just like Bill Gates, not a scientist, but is making decisions that affects the entire so-called globe. Now let's get into it. 1976 Copyright Act, Section 107. This is purposes of education, scholarship, news reporting, and overall waking your ass up here at the FOF squad. So we're gonna get into it.
Audible is the best place to listen.
Hate these damn, I know I got to get these ad blockers going, but just walk with me for a second. Let it do what it do right quick. They can't wait to promote some shit to you. Let's get into it. Let's start this from the beginning.
HIV entered the U.S., analyzing
Let's go.
It's a terrifying and mysterious disease.
AIDS activist and LGBT icon Larry Kramer has been at the forefront of the gay rights movement for over 50 years. He says that the recent news that one man did not trigger the HIV/AIDS epidemic in America comes as no surprise.
I don't know why it has suddenly become a story again. We've known that Patient Zero as Patient Zero didn't exist from 2011. The first Patient Zero was in 1921 in the Congo, and it went on from there. By 1978, over 4% of San Francisco men.
I can't even listen to this motherfucker no more. Now, look, he said that the Patient Zero came. Now, remember who Patient Zero is. That's the first motherfucker to have some shit, right? Now, think about this as we put all of the things together. Now, virus means, let's take a look at virus. Virus means like slimy fluid in Latin, or poisonous fluid. And in the medieval times, it meant venom from a serpent. Now, this is where, obviously you got the symbolism of the serpent in there, and for their medical industry. Now, the thing is that what you have to understand is the first virus that they isolated was from a plant, the tobacco plant. Okay? And, the one who became a trailblazer in that field was a guy by the name of Dmitry Ivanovsky, right? But the thing is, what you have to understand too as well, now notice, he said 1921. Remember, the electron microscope wasn't created until 1931. DNA wasn't created until, or substantiated until 1953. Okay, and then in 1970, we're going to highlight this guy by the name of David Baltimore because it's going to be extremely important to the segment. He didn't come up with the term reverse transcriptase until 1970. Now, reverse transcriptase is critical to viruses like HIV and even like hepatitis B, because remember, viruses can't replicate themselves. Okay, so this is critical. So now think about this. This is where I say, this is where it hits home. He said Patient Zero was established in 1921. Now we already know, how can, since they tell you, even we're going to use Dr. Robert Wilner as a source, that malnutrition was the source of AIDS, what they know this in the medical literature for a very long time, that if the body doesn't have proper nutrition, it's going to break down, right? But the thing is like I said, they didn't have none of this technology. So even if you now just, you're looking at it from the standpoint of they got the technology and they were going, took samples from, people from the early 20th century, that still wouldn't suffice, because then you're sitting up here and saying you can boil it down to the first person. So you telling me that you didn't know who was the first person to have it? Not going to believe that. So you see what he's saying? They still wanted to get it. What? They wanted to associate you with your community. Because remember, it didn't start with us. Even here, remember, it took off in the States. Didn't start with us, but yeah, just like this beer virus, didn't start with us, but then we become the face of it. That's critical for your understanding. Especially when you take everything else into consideration. Now we're going to read a couple articles. Now the thing is too, also, just to highlight, because we always like to talk about some of the things that we discussed in the previous segment, remember we talked about how yeast, when it takes over the body, it affects organs. It takes over, get into the heart, the brain, the eyes, because we're going to isolate the eyes, the lungs, and all of this different stuff. Now, I'm going to show you a couple photos. That's yeast magnified 1,000 times. Okay? Ever see the squiggly lines in your eyes, people? You actually can see it. Just like if you went into the bathroom right now and you open up your mouth, and if you got white lines and stuff, or that white deposits on the sides of your cheek, that's yeast. That's a yeast overgrowth. That's primarily one of the reasons why people have halitosis and real bad breath in the morning, because obviously your mouth is not open and stuff. And remember, dark environments is where they flourish. That's why I say you have to be careful, because 4 cells, like is indicated in the book, The Rise of Yeast, can turn to billions overnight. That's why when you wake up, you have bad breath, because it don't take long for them to populate. And women, when you're feeling good down in that area, because let's keep it, in proper context, and you get that discharge, that white that's yeast. Just take care of yourself, brothers and sisters, man. But we're going to have to move on, because we got a lot of information to cover. Now, the thing is that you have to understand what's critical for your understanding. Remember how they keep changing it up. Remember we talked about that. We used the movie Django as an example, and now we're going to show you how in the 20th century they turned microbiology or biology on its head, because the central dogma of microbiology or molecular biology was that DNA was the only thing that could produce DNA. It was DNA, then RNA, then proteins. That's what they said. Now, all of a sudden, this David Baltimore guy, he's in his lab, and he says, I just happened to look upon this enzyme, because anything that ends in ASE is an enzyme. So he said this enzyme called reverse transcriptase, now the car can go in reverse. Now, all of a sudden, you didn't need DNA to replicate DNA. All of a sudden, RNA can do it, because what you have to understand is DNA is primarily in the nucleus of the cell. Just like, the RNA can be created in the nucleus, but RNA is primarily in the cytoplasm. Because now they say that the virus didn't have to enter the nucleus because it couldn't. So one thing that they did was like, it can, since RNA was in the cytoplasm, it could, use the RNA to create DNA to replicate itself. This is crucial, because without this, there is no HIV. There was no hepatitis B without this concept. And remember, it was given legitimacy through the media with Dr. Robert Gallo and I believe Margaret Thatcher in 1984. They came out on the media and said, HIV caused AIDS. And while they're saying this in the media, in court, they're arguing about whether or not it even existed. Washington Post. Science under fire behind the clash between Congress and Nobel laureate David Baltimore by Larry Thompson, May 9th, 1989. For more than 2 years, Nobel Prize winner David Baltimore has been at the center of a controversy that involves much more than the accuracy of an esoteric research paper. So it was more than just what they initially sent him to court for. They like, how in the fuck is you just coming up with this shit? You writing out articles, it's not being substantiated by the scientific community other than the people who are around you. And so we need to figure out what's going on. We need to figure out whether or not this is really actually real. Okay? So it was the very integrity of the scientific process in question. Now it says Congress, which funds nearly half of all biomedical research in this country, is questioning whether the scientific community can continue to police itself, or whether stricter So they're already saying there is no watchdog on the scientific community. This is critical. They out here just putting out shit on their own. Or whether stricter regulations are needed. But to many in academia, the pursuit of one of the nation's leading scientists could have a chilling effect on the independence of basic research. Okay, we're going to go on. Now it says, the case against Baltimore hinges on a scientific report he co-authored with 4 colleagues that was published in Cell magazine in 1986. After a junior scientist questioned the data, Baltimore and his team were investigated by 2 university panels, the National Institutes of Health and the House Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee. No evidence of fraud or even serious error was found. Now remember that. This is in 1986 that this was going on, right? Now let's read on. Now it says, even though they hadn't accused him of fraud, Dingo said, but Baltimore pulled out an April 10th, 1988 article. This is 2 years later. Boston Globe article in which Pete Stockton, a senior Dingo staffer, because Dingo was the representative from Michigan. He was the chair, I believe, the head of the Commerce and Energy Committee, right? So he said that it's hard to. Now this is what the guy said, a Dingo staffer. He said it's hard to tell if it's error or fraud. At certain times it appears to be fraud, and other times misrepresentation. So now, when they cleared them, after the fact, they're like, well, it didn't look like fraud. Well, it could have been fraud, could have been misrepresentation. I don't know. Too late now, nigga. Now, this is telling you, what actually, is actually, what the state of the science is, biology, and obviously the reputation and the power that Baltimore had. It said it turned biology on its head. Normally, genetic information flows from DNA, the genetic repository, to RNA, a messenger molecule, to the proteins that give cells shape and function. Baltimore, simultaneously with Howard Timmon of the University of Wisconsin, discovered an enzyme that makes genetic information flow the other direction, from RNA to DNA. Baltimore called the discovery a bit of luck. Ain't no luck, just made up Dr. Seuss shit. Okay, let's read on. This is also going to show you how influential he is. In addition to research, Baltimore is influential in the politics of science. He helped initiate the gene engineering debates of the mid-1970s. He chaired the National Academy of Sciences and the Institute of Medicine's Joint Studies on AIDS for 2 years and became a leading spokesman for increasing funding for AIDS research and prevention after the report came out in 1986. So after the report, after he was cleared and all that, let's increase the funding. Let's increase the campaign through the media. All right. Now, see, remember, let's go back to what I was saying too before and placing emphasis on. These crackers weren't concerned because it was just affecting us. Oh, look at these niggas running around getting HIV and AIDS. Some made up shit. Now, these are critical. These next 2 paragraphs that I'm about to read. Same article, Washington Post. About 30% of published scientific reports are never heard from again. That's because it's made up shit. And you're going to hear that from Dr. Robert Wilder too as well. He's going to, hit on that. Said Henry Small, research director of the Institute for Scientific Information, ISI in Philadelphia, a publishing house that specializes in indexing 3,300 of the world's leading scientific journals. On the average, a good scientific paper is cited about once a year over a 15-year period, Small said. According to a special ISI review, the disputed Cell paper has been cited 30 times in 3 years, 10 times more than average. That's what raised the alarm. They were like, how you getting so much? Now, it goes on to tell you the reason as to why people, within that framework were so skeptical. Let's read. It says that in a number of cases, leading institutions have been involved in hurting patients because of this fraudulent science. Sherbert Fraser, for example, resigned as head of Harvard Medical School's psychiatric hospital last year after it was disclosed that he had plagiarized information, having been caught plagiarizing in 4 scientific review papers. In another case, Stanford University corrected or withdrew 11 scientific papers that had been published on memory loss. Stephen E. Bruning, a psychiatric researcher formerly at the University of Pittsburgh, who pioneered drug treatments for mentally retarded children, pled guilty in U.S. District Court in Baltimore last year to fraud. John Darcy, a junior Harvard Medical School heart researcher who in the early 1980s was producing scientific papers at the rate of 1 every 2 weeks and putting the names of his senior colleagues on each paper. It turned out that the data were made up and the reported studies were never done. But how much fraud exists in science, which is mostly funded through taxpayers' dollars? It is not clear. Many scientists argue there is little. Okay, of course, obviously they have a bias. And then it says Dingo Committee staffers believe it is much more common and that the scientific community is not capable of policing itself. Because it's policing itself. This is why this is so dangerous. Remember, but hey, Ruud already told you, but maybe you have to hear it from these blancos. Now, what I want to do is I want to show you a video, and it's just going to be a screenshot of a video. Excuse me.
context the way that.
Now, this guy's going to be brought up in the video that I'm going to show you, you know, with Dr. Robert Wilner. But Peter Duesberg is... he's a giant in his field. Now, you see that book, Inventing the AIDS Virus. Okay? Now, remember his name, Peter Duesberg. Okay? All right? Now, I say inventing it. Okay? Let's go because we got, you know, we don't have a lot of time. We're going to start at the 7-minute mark.
Well, to an extent that was true of some of these individuals, but only true because of the second. Where else? Now it's interesting, a lot of questions are asked of me whenever I appear before the cameras and do what some people have called a stunt, to sell books. I'm from the planet Earth. I honestly believe that these individuals are from the planet Uranus. How anyone could suggest that I would stick myself with a virus that is supposedly deadly for the purpose of selling a book, that's complete insanity. And I will put the lie to the individuals of the NIH, particularly Gallo and Fauci and Hazeltine and Essex, and the rest of these scoundrels of the worst order. Criminals guilty of genocide, without a doubt. I invite them to take me to court. I wish Burroughs Wellcome would take me to court, because they have been putting out a killer drug knowingly. Because in a court of law, I would have the opportunity to provide the absolute proof and evidence, as I have in my book, Deadly Deception. Now, I'm not alone in what I'm doing here today. How does the press escape such obvious truths? Why would the finest virologist in the world, the most noted virologist, member of our National Academy of Sciences, Peter Duesberg.
See? Peter Duesberg.
Why would he put his entire career on the line? What did he have to gain? He's already lost his laboratory and his funding. They can't take away his professorship because he's tenured. Why would a Charles A. Thomas, professor emeritus of Harvard, say the same thing? Why would Kary Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize in virology last year, why would he stick his neck out? What did he have to gain? These are the questions reporters should be asking. And in order to sell a book.
Because see, what he was doing as well was he was injecting himself with HIV. He had patients there who they said had it, and he was injecting himself with it. And then when he was getting tested, they were saying, "Oh, you're HIV negative." You see what I'm saying? He was offering $100,000 to anybody who could prove that HIV caused AIDS. Let's move on. We're gonna move on to the 11-minute mark. And you notice the name. You notice the name that he mentioned, Dr. Fauci. He was at the center of this, just like he at the center of this shit now. Let's go.
And don't just think of street drugs. Because the number one cause of AIDS today is actually two medical drugs. AZT, a drug that was discovered in the 60s as a chemotherapeutic drug for cancer and was shelved because it was too toxic to treat cancer, a drug worse than cancer, to use to treat people who are immunosuppressed. Now let's go back to the other causes of AIDS. So it's not only street drugs, but medical drugs, but now 3 is radiation. Whether they worry about it, Chernobyl and Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But number 4 is chemotherapy. Number 4 The number 4 cause of death of acquired immune deficiency diseases, chemotherapy. And the most toxic chemotherapeutic drug of all times, AZT, is what they're now using to treat AIDS. And the Concord study, completed last year. Now, can you imagine saying to the world, where was the press? Where are you people? Here they're giving a drug that costs thousands of dollars a year, and it doesn't do any good? That's if you want to believe that. But did anybody here bother to look at the insert, the paper that comes with the drug? It's a DNA terminator. It means it is a terminator, just like the movie. It terminates life. You terminate DNA, you terminate life. And they talk about side effects in the insert. When are you going to learn there is no such thing as a side effect in medicine? It's an unwanted direct effect. And you know what one of the unwanted direct effects of AZT is? Lymphoma, cancer, one of the diseases of AIDS, as they call it. Oh, another so-called side effect, which is really an unwanted direct effect, pancytopenia. You need a definition? Pancytopenia. Pan, all, cyto, cells, penia, loss of all your cells. That's AIDS. That is the definition of AIDS. So,
and we have continuing.
So as you see, the medicine that I can't even call it medicine. That's an insult. What they were giving people were actually causing AIDS, and they had you. That's why they wanted you to get tested. And especially if you were of our persuasion, it was more likely that you were going to end up positive. Okay? And then they gave you the medication and you were wasting away. And at that time, when they wanted it to really look scary, they were increasing the doses. So now, as you see, they had you thinking like, oh, okay, over time the medication was getting better. The only thing that they were doing was decreasing the dose. So that now they're saying that, oh, you can live with it. Okay? But then that's why you guys have to understand that was how they changed it up. But when they first started it off, they were giving it to you in high doses to make you look sickly. And it was killing you inside. Okay? So we're going to go to the 29-minute mark. Let's get it.
Other individuals in the study died. The number 1 cause is malnutrition and starvation. Well, to an extent that was true of some of these individuals, but only true because of the second reason. The number 2 cause is drugs. You recall, you fellows and gals in the press, a couple of weeks ago you reported in your newspapers that we were killing off our senior citizens with too many drugs. And how do you cure them? You get them off the drugs. And how were these people dying of so-called AIDS? From the number 2 cause, drugs. Both medical and street drugs. But one in particular that stood out.
Hold on 1 second. Give me 1 second, people. Make sure this battery life don't run out. Okay, and then what he's going to say is that in the last, because I don't really have enough time, it's about 4 minutes. You can start at the 44-minute mark. But what he's going to talk about is he's going to say that he said, you wonder what happens to these diseases. He said most of the articles that's published on disease, he said, ain't it crazy how they just seemingly disappear? Remember, I told you to commit that to memory. How it even talked about in the Washington Post article that I had given you that most of the papers that come out in disease, they mysteriously disappear. Why? Because they make shit up. Ain't no such thing as a Blanco scientist. And like I said before, this is the crazy part about it, is that they haven't looked at us as a great example. They've been experimenting in our community, and then Blancos been like, oh, that's just y'all. Now with the pandemic, look at them rushing around like a chicken with their head cut off. But you weren't looking at our situation. They told you this is what they was going to do. But you let them establish this fraudulent pseudo bullshit. And now you sitting up here, you got individuals sitting up here, even people from our community. Oh, we got this Blanco scientist and they're going to tell us what's really going on. Man, shut the fuck up. First of all, ain't no such thing as no Blanco scientist. And those who got a heart, they sitting up here, they've been blowing the whistle when it was going down. You see, that's why I said, man, like I told before, we're going to commit that to memory. The sinking of the Lusitania in World War I. They knew where Japan was going to bomb in World War II. They blew a president's brains out on the Zapruder film and told you a magical bullet went through Conley and all of this bullshit. 9/11, all of this different shit. And what did you get? You don't get these Blancos ain't tough. They don't want to go against the machine. They'd rather sit up there and make the excuse and go against you and your fucking communities because they fucking scared. And it's one of the reasons why I told y'all that's why your ass need to be at the back of the fucking bus. It's time for us to take back planet Earth because you don't know what the fuck you doing. And you don't want to go after the real people. That's why I said, man, all this fake ass pseudo shit got the end, man. I'm telling you, ain't nobody bringing it like Heru. Most of these people think that they bringing all of this stuff to the forefront. You see, I don't concentrate on all of that other shit. I don't concentrate on sexuality more than like that. I might hint on it and all of that different shit, but I don't make it as a focal point because that's a distraction. I just let you know exactly what's going on. That's all. But I stay focused on the game. I'm looking at the shot clock. We running out of time. So now you know what their end game is, Dr. Fauci. You fucking fraud. You ain't no scientist. Because we know what at the FOF squad? Ain't no such thing as a Blanco scientist. And I am killing you niggas. I am so Michigan. FOF squad.